You're listening to Under the Shell Podcast, the best in America.
Welcome to Under the Shell, presented by Testudo Times. I'm Brendan Wiesel.
Sam Jane, we back.
Michael Howes.
This week, we honor Lefty Driesell by bringing on his former player and someone who has stayed very closely involved with the University of Maryland. Len Elmore, take it away.
Our next guest is a former Maryland Terrapins star, a first-team All-ACC selection, and the all-time leader in rebounds. His list of accolades is very, very long, and we could go on forever today. But we are so honored to have on Mr. Len Elmore. Len, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, gentlemen.
I guess first thing we want to start off with is Coach Driesell. You played for him way back when. Recently passed away. He kind of just talked about the impact that he had on you while at the University of Maryland and then post playing here at Maryland.
Well, Coach was a supreme motivator. That's one of the things that I think that influenced me and that stayed with me throughout my career. He was kind of a Dale Carnegie devotee and, always found ways to make sure that, we were motivated, we were disciplined in our craft. In our training room, in the locker room, we'd always have motivational signs around that maintained, the concepts, things like there's no I in team, and the harder I work, the luckier I get. You can imagine some of the other things that were said, but, that was one of the areas. The other area was, Coach had an instinct for obviously doing what was right and what was moral. A son of the South. He was one of the first coaches to recruit African-American players. He tried to get Charlie Scott to come to Davidson in the 60s, mid-60s. Obviously, Dean Smith got him. But he wound up recruiting a gentleman, Mike Malloy, who actually lived not too far from me in Queens, New York. He hired the first African-American coach in the ACC, assistant coach, George Raveling. George Raveling became a Hall of Famer, as did Coach. Lefty started four Black players, which was at the time unheard of in the ACC. He didn't care necessarily about color on the floor. Certainly he was sensitive to our needs and our wants, but he was that kind of person. And not only, as I say, moral and principled, but he was also very spiritual, very religious. And, while I couldn't say that I'm religious per se, but that morality, that spirituality certainly stuck with us as well.
Do you remember some of those first interactions? You mentioned recruiting. Do you remember his kind of pitch to get you to come to Maryland?
For me, probably a little bit different than say my running partner, my mate, Tom McMillan. For me, it was about coming down to a university where, I could not only reach my goals as a basketball player, but my goal at that time was to be a lawyer, and introduced me to several prominent lawyers who graduated from Maryland, one of whom was Senator Joe Tidings at the time. And Senator Tidings and I became pretty close over that period of time. It was his recommendation that I become an English major to work on my communicative skills. But recruiting, he was an amazing salesman. He was the kind of guy that I would get a letter from either him or one of the other coaches almost every single day. I get a telephone call at least once a week to check on me, see how I was doing. They stayed in front of you and really kept them top of mind. And of course, the visit to the University of Maryland. I had gone to places like Princeton, Boston College, St. John's was a favorite of mine at the time. But, once I got down to College Park, recognizing kind of nestled between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, two major urban pockets, to be able to walk in Cole Fieldhouse, 14,500 fans could be seated there. I mean, there was nothing like it. He pulled out all the stops. And, I will say there's one thing he didn't have much to do with. That is, I went to an all-male Catholic school here in New York City, Power Memorial. So when I got to Maryland, I was asking myself, okay, if the first 10 women were good looking, I think I'm going. So it turned out to be okay. I actually met my wife in my junior year. Ultimately, the woman who became my wife my junior year. So it all worked out.
I want to ask you a little bit about your careers because I know you're one of the most versatile people that I've ever read about. I mean, basketball player, then you were a prosecutor, then you went to sports agency, right, and sports management kind of, and then you became a broadcaster. Are there any that I'm missing, first of all? And second off, which one did you enjoy the most, in terms of I know, like, I've read that you said you really loved the prosecutor job, but the money wasn't good enough. Like, how did you balance everything, and which one did you look back on and say, hey, I had the most fun in this one?
Well, let me start from the beginning, obviously, and that is that I, uh, had a desire, a penchant to do a lot of things, to experience a lot of things, and the driving force for that was reading the biography of Paul Robeson, who, at the turn of the century, and he was the All-American football player, valedictorian at Rutgers, Phi Beta Kappa, became a lawyer at Columbia, was a stage and screen actor star during that period of time. And he was a human rights activist. Not only did he play football, but he also played in the Negro Leagues in baseball. And he played also in the NFL before the NFL excluded blacks for a period of time. And when I read his story and from where he came, his father was a freed, enslaved man who became a preacher in Princeton, New Jersey. I thought about that type of experience, and wouldn't it be wonderful to experience a lot of things? So, I never really thought about and planned it out. I just accepted opportunities as they came. Playing in the NBA, I always kept the dream of being a lawyer. And so when my final year, my 10th year, where I decided I'd had enough of playing basketball, took the LSATs, filled out the applications, got accepted to law school. But in my second year of law school, I was called by the ACC network at the time was Raycom. And they were looking for someone to fill a role, and that role was to be the first African-American announcer for the ACC. And so I accepted that call, and it's pretty easy to do that. And as a lawyer, when I got out, I wanted to have some impact. I could have gone to some major corporate law firms and, probably reviewed documents for a period of time before I ultimately got a chance to do some lawyering. But at that time, I was 10 years older than most of my law school colleagues. So, I wanted some action, and I wanted to be a trial attorney. So going to the district attorney's office in Kings County, where it was a progressive DA and Elizabeth Holtzman, who really was focused on doing justice rather than merely convicting. And I had an opportunity to, work in my pretty much hometown. I was born and raised, for the most part, in Brooklyn, New York, before we moved to Queens. So it was an opportunity to kind of give back to my community. I certainly enjoyed that experience for over 4 years. I don't know if anybody's watched Law and Order, especially the early ones. I could say that those experiences were probably spot on. But I enjoyed the drama. I enjoyed the interaction, particularly with all the parties and stakeholders involved. But then you're right, it didn't pay enough. My wife and I were getting started here in Manhattan. We're going to start a family. The opportunity came along at some point to do television on a network basis, and I followed that. But I still had that penchant to do something, to give something back. And so, after being approached by a number of players who were defrauded or victimized some way, shape, or form by their representation, I decided to try my hand at being an agent to try to change that landscape, which I think we had a pretty good impact. However, that business became, pretty murky, and I refused to stoop to conquer, to pay players to be my clients, et cetera, et cetera. So I moved out of there, continued my network broadcasting to go along with working in some private firms. I became the president and executive director of the National Basketball Retired Players Association. From there, Got an opportunity to work with the NBA and the NCAA in their joint venture to clean up youth basketball in a company called iHoops, and continued private practice for a while and continued sports broadcasting. And when all that was over, I recognized that I've amassed all this institutional knowledge. What am I going to do with it? I can't take it with me when I transition. So, I decided an opportunity came to me to teach. And that's why I'm in my 6th year at Columbia University, full-time faculty in their sports management program, utilizing the things that I've learned in so many of those areas that I previously mentioned. And that's really how it came about. It was all about a dream, all about emulating somebody that I certainly admired and just taking advantage of opportunities.
So, Mr. Elmore, obviously, you're one of the people that I look at. I'm just like, this guy's resume is insane. And I think, just speaking with you, I can tell, how obviously, smart and experienced you are in a lot of different ventures. So I want to ask kind of a complicated question, I guess, in a way. Obviously, when we talk about Lefty Driesell, like, what everything that you said in the beginning part is true, and he obviously was a great basketball coach and provided a lot of opportunities for African Americans. But on the flip side, there's also the part that he wasn't necessarily an advocate for women, as we saw, there are situations in the past, and it's a complicated legacy that he leaves. So for me, and I guess for other fans out there who didn't know Lefty, how have you approached what you think about his legacy and kind of that way, and how would you advise people to go about thinking of people like Lefty from a different era, and things like that, because I think it's a complicated question.
Yeah, and it's a good question. Look, I look at people, in this cancel culture, where we're so quick to pull the trigger on canceling folks because of viewpoints and actions that at the time in their era, in their milieu, uh, weren't as destructive as they would be when interpreted today. I think Coach was necessarily, I should say, a product of his time. He's the sum of his experiences, and so looking at him in those years, you could just say he wasn't alone. It's similar to, do we cancel Thomas Jefferson because he was a slave owner, and obviously he had a concubine of an underage girl? Do we cancel the Woodrow Wilsons of the world because they brought segregation back to Washington D.C. and the White House? He brought it back as president. I mean, I can go on and on and on. But the bottom line is that my personal experience with the man, and what he had meant to me and the impact he had on me, is something that won't dissipate simply because in today's in today's viewpoint that we find the warts. We have to take some of the folks' warts and all and kind of balance it out and look at it as being humanity, more than anything else. The errors of their ways as well as the positive things that they've done. I'm sure people will look at me 20 years from now and say, he didn't do this, or he might have said that, and it might tarnish whatever reputation I've developed. But that's the nature of being prominent and celebrated.
What was your relationship with Lefty like after you left Maryland and after you kind of went on to your other careers that you've talked about? Did you kind of stay close with him, and how often would you connect with him and talk to him?
Well, yeah, I certainly would check in with Coach periodically. I was invited to come back and speak to his teams. And he would always, take the initiative to call and see how we're doing. As I said, and I think Tom McMillan said it best in some interview where, Coach cared as much, if not more so, about Tom being a Rhodes Scholar, about me going to Harvard Law School and becoming a lawyer, as much as he did about us succeeding in basketball. And I think obviously because it reflected well on him, as part of, our total mentorship, But also, I think he genuinely cared about us succeeding and achieving our goals. It's amazing how you spend 4 years with an individual, in close contact, and the impact that they have on your life for the rest of your life it's amazing.
Do you have a favorite story about Lefty from when you were playing for him at Maryland, or maybe even after playing for him here?
I think one favorite story that I recall was, again, from a motivational standpoint, and the lengths that he went to get us, to bring out the best in us. I think we were playing the University of Richmond, and they were opening up their gym at the time, the A.H. Robbins Center, and we were pretty good, and we were kind of a little lackadaisical and laconic in our approach to playing them, and Coach could sense that, and so in the pregame speech he heard their band playing Dixie, and so recognizing that some of us were relatively politically astute, mostly me, he would just go crazy and he would bang the locker. You hear what they're playing? And bang the locker, and kind of brought a little blood to his knuckles. And he said, "See what they made me do? This is what they think of you." That type of stuff. And, it really got us upset and scared. So we went out, and I think we beat them by about 25-30 on their home floor. But, it was basically because, he got riled up. He touched some nerves, recognizing exactly what buttons to push for us, and it got us fired up. And I think that was another thing he was good at, recognizing what motivated individuals, and he would press those buttons.
You talked about kind of Lefty's legacy, and as we kind of wrap up this portion, what do you think that your legacy is?
My legacy? Wow. Hopefully we won't have to discuss that for a real long time, but I'm hopeful that people recognize that, I try to take advantage of the opportunities given to me, that, I'm a case of perseverance, a case of recognizing, how my community needs me. And I'm not talking about just the Black community. I'm talking about community of basketball players. I'm talking about the community of my generation coming up in the late 60s and the 70s. And I tried to do what was asked of me and what was needed. And, always with respect for other people. And that's hopefully my epitaph, that, I cared and respected others.
Well, Mr. Elmore, thank you so much. This is honestly, like I was telling the guys, like this is one of the interviews I've been the most excited for. We've been doing this podcast for 2 years, and not only just because you were a great player, but because just everything on your resume, like I said, and it's super, super cool to be able to talk to someone who's so knowledgeable in so many different fields. So thank you for taking your time out of the day. I think I can speak for all three of us and say we really appreciate it.
No, I appreciate it, and thank you very much. And hopefully something that I said is useful.
Well, you heard it from Len talking all about Lefty and the legacy he leaves behind here at Maryland. But we had a super interesting conversation with him. Other than that, I mean, guys, just real quick, I think he's probably one of the smartest people we've talked to, if not just, I mean, an incredibly accomplished man, covered a wide variety of topics in his days. So it was super fun to be able to chat with him. And I think that as we kind of, think about Len Elmore, you have to think about the totality of who he is. So again, thanks for Len for coming on.
And he was previously a terrific Terp. I think that anytime you can get someone who's in that regard on the podcast is pretty neat. But also I felt that, I did research about him then, but I thought even going into the podcast, the more I researched about him, the more interesting he became, and the more I realized he did. I mean, truly did it all, still doing stuff. So
A very multifaceted man, pro basketball player, broadcaster, lawyer, like just many skills for Mr. Len Elmore.
definitely an accomplished Terp. And if this person that we're going to be talking about next can live up to anything that Len Elmore did in college, I think Terps fans will be just as excited as they were when he committed. But Derek Queen, news of the week, I think, committed to Maryland, long tenured commitment going on there. But Queen, obviously, one of the better players in the country. Real quick, I'm sure everybody knows, but second highest rated player in to commit to Maryland in its history. Number 10 overall prospect by ESPN, 12 by 247, and number 15 by Rivals. This was a must. Kevin Willard had to have this recruit because he only had one committed for the class of 24 up until then. And guys, I mean, take me through how big, I don't want to try to quantify Queen's commitment, but or like sum it up in a couple words, but how important do you think this was for him? And, what do you think about Queen as a player?
I think that what Kevin Willard does next with the roster construction is going to be even more important than Derek Queen's commitment. There's still a whole lot of work to do. Obviously, Jameer Young, Dante Scott aren't going to be here anymore. Juju Reese, Deshaun Harris-Smith going to highlight those returning players, but they're going to need a little bit more than that. You're going to want to see Kevin Willard have a little more action in the transfer portal than just picking up a player like Jordan Geronimo. They're going to need to get some solidified starters for this Terps rotation coming up next season.
Mike, you mentioned two people who are returning. I don't know. I mean, I would think they would, but also in this day and age, like, you never know. I mean, we've talked about it, but pretty much you're on 1-year contracts every year. So who's to really say what's going to happen in the next year? But Derek Queen is huge, and it's huge for the future of Maryland basketball. And so I don't know. I think if Willard hadn't got this recruit, there were going to be so many questions heading into next season and what they were going to do. But this, I think, provides a little bit more stability. The one thing that I want to talk about, and I know Sam has voiced his opinion on Twitter about this, but I think it's kind of ridiculous for a program who's, has 4 or 5 games left in the season to, be going crazy over a recruit when, that's not going to be mattering for another year. Like, the team is in the middle of a season right now, and they, if they play really well, maybe they can make tournament. They have to obviously win the Big Ten tournament, but it's like a team that is still fighting for something this season to then start posting about a player who just committed. I mean, I understand that it's big, second highest recruit, but I think it's, pretty silly to be going that crazy over somebody who has committed, hasn't even signed anything. So that's just my take on it.
Yeah, I think I get both sides because I totally see what you're saying, Brendan, but I also understand why fans they're just looking to pull something positive from this season, right? I mean, this has been objectively a disastrous year. So I think that, like, when you look at it, I understand why fans are excited over Queen. My thing is that exactly what Mike said, and I think he phrased it really well, is that now that Queen is committed, I don't think it shrinks any sort of, pressure that Willard has to win next year. You have to find some clear pieces that you can add in the portal that will help make a winning difference on next year's team. Nikki Wolcott of the Diamondback did a really good piece on, like, kind of Queen and Juju Reese's fit. He actually said that it could work really well, but he said that if you have them two together, you have to add shooters, right? You can't have two non-spacing, because Queen can't really shoot. You can't have two plottering big man and then not surround them with any shooters. That was a problem on this year's team, and they don't start two big men. Well, actually they do, Jordan Geronimo. But I think that you need to add some high-level players in the portal. You have to find a point guard, right? I mean, I think that's got to be the number one priority. I don't know if DHS is ready for a full. He's looked better, and they beat Rutgers. We're recording Sunday, so they beat Rutgers today, and he looked really good. But I don't know if you can expect him to shoulder the load. So I think that when you look at this team, Willard still needs to bring in some pieces. And it really comes down to, is this a 2022 offseason when he adds Jameer Young and Don Carey, who played a good role, or is this a 23 offseason where your best addition was Jordan Geronimo? So I think he's got to have a roster reconstruction, and it starts with Doug McDaniel. Psych.
Speaking of Jordan Geronimo, though, big game for him today. We're recording on Sunday. Maryland just defeated Rutgers. Jordan Geronimo, 11 points, 11 rebounds, double-double for him. Probably one of the best showings for him this season, and it kind of showed what Kevin Willard imagined this Terps team would be heading into the season. It was a tough, grimy defensive win by the Terps. Really just kind of showed their dominance on that side of the ball the entire game.
Problem is you can't play Rutgers every game. So that's the issue, because Rutgers is just as bad as Maryland is on offense, probably worse at this point. So good win for them. I think Brennan's right, though. At this point of the season, guys, it feels like it's win the Big Ten tournament or kind of bust here, or at least make it to the finals. So, yeah, men's basketball in the same spot that they were last week.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've been looking at a little bit of the NIT projections, which is something I didn't think I would have to Google, but it seems like Maryland, if they continue to, I mean, whatever, 3 games left on this schedule, probably going to make the NIT tournament, but like not for sure. And there's a lot of uncertainties there if they'd actually go. So I don't know, but seems they would still make that. But 3 games to go, and if they can win the Big Ten tournament, then maybe they'd make the NCAA. I mean, if they win the Big Ten tournament, they'll make the NCAA tournament. But I think that is extremely unlikely. Game against Northwestern in College Park. Early in the season, Maryland almost beat Northwestern on the road, lost by 3. Northwestern's had kind of an odd season, had that big upset against Purdue earlier in the year, and I think people kind of thought, including myself, that Northwestern was going to be pretty good this year. Boo has been pretty darn good as well, but they're another team that's kind of also sitting on the bubble. They're in right now, but the last couple of games for them also dictate their season. So we'll have to see. What are you guys' thoughts on the upcoming game?
It's a winnable game for the Terps. We saw what they did when they went down to Northwestern earlier this season, like you said. They also got Indiana and Penn State left on their schedule, so are also winnable games for them. But we've seen what this team does. They lose games that they're supposed to win. So you really can't say this is a winnable game for them.
Yeah, agree 100%. I mean, at this point, you got to go do it.
I did see, though, that the win over Rutgers gave them the bye for the Big Ten tournament today, I believe.
They still can get the double bye, which is crazy. But I think that's more of an indictment of the Big Ten rather than Maryland. So, yeah, I mean, both teams, the women's team as well, is in position, but they kind of took a crater today. Lost to Ohio State, the number 2 team in the country, on the road by 13. A tough loss. Kind of a similar script to every game that Maryland's played against top 10, top 15 opponents. I actually have a piece that has come out at this point that you all should go read about exactly that. They have really struggled to win games against premier opponents. Now, they are still in the tournament as of now. Like, they are still in that projection. This loss doesn't change that. But I think that when you look at this team overall, yes, they're competitive. Yes, they put up a fight against good teams. Yes, it's always close in the fourth quarter. But at the end of the day, your record says who you are. And so we can talk about losing close games and, I'm proud of how the team fought, and that's all good and well. But eventually, losses need to turn into wins, or else you go home in March. And this team, I think, just hasn't found a way to get that one win that really can kind of flip the trajectory of the season.
Yeah, and it's just kind of the same issues we've been seeing all season. The depth is so razor thin at this point with Lavender Briggs' injury last week, and it just really doesn't couple well with how they have been playing players out of their position. For example, you've got an undersized Faith Masonis and Allie Quebec playing in the post. Throw Brene Alexander in there sometimes, which is completely misusing her. And then try to pair that up against a team like Indiana, where you're playing against Mackenzie Holmes. That formula is not really going to work out for you. Don't have a true point guard. We've been talking about that all season long. And like Sam said, a bunch of these games against ranked opponents just feel the same. They go down early. They storm back in the second half. It gets interesting by the fourth quarter, and they end up losing by 10 points. It's kind of the same narrative we've been seeing.
So I want to talk about this for a little bit, kind of take this game and look at it as a whole. So when we talk about Ohio State, right, they're one of the top teams in the country. If not, you could argue they're playing like the best team. They have 3 stars, J.C. Sheldon, Cody McMahon, Taylor Theory, all Big Ten team caliber players. Maryland does too, though, if you think about it. Cheyenne Sellers, Jakia Brown-Turner, and Bree McDaniel have all played like all-conference level talent these past couple months, and Bree and Cheyenne especially just over the course of the season. The issue is what Mike talked about. around the edges, right? Brene Alexander had a phenomenal game today. But if Brene Alexander is the only tertiary piece that is, and she's only getting 9 shots. That's the other thing. It's not like she needs to be putting up more of those if you have that limited depth, right? Because you have to fill the scoring somewhere. The issue is Ohio State, outside of those top 3, have 5 players that have played over 100 collegiate basketball games. Can you guess how many Maryland has that are currently healthy right now outside of their top 3? So Jakia, Bree, and Shy.
I'm gonna guess 1. It's probably Faith Masonis, right?
2, Brene and her.
Okay, yeah.
So that's an issue, right? They only have 7 and that was add Lav into the mix. Yeah, that changes it. But before that, they didn't even have experience, right? Because Riley and Chardon, who are going to be their other 2 options, don't have a ton of collegiate experience. The other issue that we need to talk about, and I think that it's been kind of brushed aside this year because of how good she's been, but Cheyenne Sellers has really struggled against premier competition. Today, she was not good. She was held out in foul trouble for pretty much the entire second quarter, the majority of the first half. And then even when she was in the game, I mean, she scored 7 points and never really got going. And it's been kind of a theme of the year. She's only averaging around 13 points a game and is shooting 32% from the field against ranked opponents. Now, she had that injury, and I think that's definitely hindering her. But a lot of these games against ranked opponents came even before the injury. So I don't know if it's teams devoting a ton to her and she still hasn't figured it out yet. I don't know if it's just a weird trend because she was good against top teams last year. But whatever it is, that's an issue in March when your best player has struggled against premier competition.
Yeah, it's definitely not a promising sign for the Terps to see Shy playing like that. One team that did escape at least a weekend with a victory was the baseball team. They finished the weekend 2-1. Honestly, should have been 3-0. Had a game today, Sunday, against Washington that should have won. Had the lead, top of the 8th inning, gave up a 3-run home run in the bottom frame. Didn't score again in the 9th. But again, we mentioned last week that they should view this weekend as a 2-1 weekend with the games they had lined up, and they did just that. Have a 5-2 record to open up Matt Swope's first season at head coach.
What happened in the Washington game today?
We've kind of seen it a little bit so far this season where the offense has cold stretches within games. Today, between the 2nd and the 7th inning, 14 straight batters did not reach base. If you're trying to win a game, especially with the way Maryland's been winning games in recent years behind their offense, you cannot have a cold stretch like that. They jumped ahead 3-1 early in the 2nd inning, but that cold stretch allowed Washington to just inch back into the game, tied it at 3 in the 7th inning, I believe it was. Maryland got back ahead in the 8th, but Washington, because that cold stretch, they were able to inch back, scored some runs in the 8th, and escaped with a victory.
So, Mike, if you had to pick, because obviously it's been a good start, right? That's what now? What's the record? 5-2?
5-2.
And, the win against Washington would have been huge. But if you had to pick 3 players that have stood out to you so far as kind of either good or bad, who would you pick? I know Chris Akopian will be on there, the freshman. He's been really good. But who are some others that have stood out to you, both in the positive and in the negative maybe?
Chris, of course, but also his brother Eddie. Eddie's leading the team right now in batting average. Would have had a huge hit today. Would have been his 2nd of the weekend. Go-ahead RBIs. Washington, of course, scored that, had that home run in the 8th. But he also had a hit Friday against Texas A&M Corpus Christi, put the Terps ahead in the 9th inning. He's been playing really well for them. Kind of a group of guys, but I'll say other than today, where the relievers struggled at times, gave up that home run, the relief pitching has been extremely improved from last season. And then I've had to round it out. I'd probably say Jacob Orr. Not a lot of people saw Jacob Orr having the type of start of the season that he's had. I didn't really imagine him playing that big of a role in the lineups as a whole. I thought freshman Jordan Crossland was going to play over him, but Orr has been playing well. He's gotten some well-timed RBIs, had a big home run the first game of the season to kind of kickstart a Terps comeback in that. I would say those three.
Yeah, I think that this team has been. I mean, you would have liked to have beaten Washington, right? I mean, that would have been the best win of the weekend, probably. But I think this team has started off about as good as you could have asked for from Matt Swope. They have a big couple game coming up. Real quick, Mike, what are you looking for against Georgetown?
Georgetown, you just want to see Ryan Van Buren continue to look good on the mound in these midweek starts. Maryland struggled with the midweeks, hasn't really had a solidified pitcher in that spot in recent years. But Van Buren had a really good showing last Tuesday. So you're looking to keep that up. And then Wednesday against VCU, don't know who the pitcher will be then, but kind of looking for that same theme of having a solidified starter there in those midweek spots.
Do you think 1-1, 2-0? What do you think are the Terps looking at?
2-0. These midweek games are usually, I wouldn't say fairly easy, but they're winnable.
They lost to Georgetown last year.
They did lose to Georgetown once last year, but I think they took 2 or maybe one other game against them.
Interesting. So 2-0 is what Big Mike is predicting. The baseball boys are off to a good start. Their offense is always hot. At the Bob especially, so it'll be interesting to see what they look like this weekend. Can't say the same for Maryland softball usually, but they did beat Green Bay and scored 9 runs. Let's clap it up for the softball squad. Finally got that offense going. Real quick though, just some quick hitters because it wasn't necessarily the most exciting weekend. They played a couple of games out in a tournament this weekend. They beat Green Bay, obviously, but they also lost a game as well. The LIU beat the Terps. So Lauren Karn again just chugging along conference play here. Not going to look necessarily the prettiest, I would think, but she's just trying to build a culture. So that's it for the softball squad. Got a much better team that we can talk about now. The lacrosse teams. Brendan, where do you want to start? Men's had another good win against Princeton. After a tough game for the women's team. So where do we want to start?
Let's start with the men. I guess we'll end it sour, but the men are looking very, very strong. They moved to 4-0 with the win over Princeton. Like you said, a big game upcoming this weekend, though, against Notre Dame. It was the game they lost last year in CQ Stadium. I think it was a double overtime. I knew it was at least 2 overtimes. I don't know. I was in the stands for that game, and it felt like it lasted forever. But Maryland looking to revenge another loss from last year. Notre Dame came in this past weekend. They were the number 1 team in the country, and then they lost to Georgetown. The interesting thing about that is that Georgetown lost to Loyola Maryland, and Loyola Maryland lost to University of Maryland. So bunch of kind of parity there, a possibility. But going into this game, if Notre Dame hadn't lost to Georgetown and they hadn't really played that strong competition, I would have said Notre Dame is the favorite in that game. They're led by the Kavanaugh brothers, Chris and Pat, who were incredible last year in the NCAA tournament. Notre Dame, extremely strong offense this year. But for Maryland, they're kind of an opposite team for Maryland, as Maryland has an extremely strong defense. Ajax Zapatello has looked great, and they've really relied on that team, really relied on their defense to do the majority of the work, and then the offense has kind of been more by committee. So it's going to be a super exciting game coming up at Notre Dame.
Zapatello, man, he is sick. Like, he is such a good player, and just his tenacity on defense. I watched some of the highlights of the Princeton game, and just ridiculous level of nonstop moving and able to knock balls out of sticks and things like that. So he's been really, really good, and I'm excited to see this Notre Dame game. I'm probably going to watch it next Sunday. So that'll be a good one. And then they got a couple more. They have long gaps, Brendan, in between. It's almost like week gaps in between games then, because they play Brown and Virginia. But we can get to those in a later episode. The women's team, on the other hand, Mike B. Brutal loss. Kind of a tough ending. Really just blew it. So what'd you see in that one? And do you think it means anything to the totality of the season?
Yeah, the Florida loss isn't great. I'll dial back the clock a little bit. Had a pretty solid 14-7 win over Drexel. Got a bunch of people in, and defense like the men's team, is pretty much the heart and soul of this team as well, although they probably are stronger than the men's team comparatively on offense. But, as they say, Sam, defense wins championships. So got the win in the Drexel game, but the loss to Florida was odd. Florida coming in was 0-2. They had 2 ranked losses, but Maryland was up 5 at the half. Yeah. For a period of that game, Florida didn't score. Florida went on a 26-minute scoreless streak. You really shouldn't lose a game where you hold a team to no points for, a little less than half of the game. But Florida really caught fire in that third quarter. They had 7 goals. And then after that, it felt that Maryland was never really in control again. So, for the totality of the season, it's a they're 1-1 in overtime. It's a game that, if you watch just the first half, you think, oh, Maryland probably wins by 5 or 6 goals. They look completely dominant. The defense was incredible. But, it shows that this team has flaws. And I think people knew that going in. But after the first 3 or 4 games, people, at least myself, was like, wow, this team is pretty dang good. And then you see the collapse in the second half, and it makes you think just a little bit differently there. So that's pretty much what I saw from that game. Sam, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that the just a weird ending, like you said, but also, I think Florida will end up being a quality loss. They're a pretty solid SEC team, and I think they'll probably come out of that conference as maybe one of the top teams. But you do have to win that game, I think, if you're at home. So they'll be back on Saturday against Denver. Denver actually pretty solid. They lost to Michigan, who's ranked number 10 at the time, 8-4. But they also have beat Louisville and Ohio State. So they have proven they can hang with high-caliber opponents. And Emily Sterling, Corey Edmondson, and them will be trying to get back on their winning ways.
Yeah, you mentioned that Florida is still going to be a strong team, and I have to agree with that. You can't be a bad team and lose. You can't be a bad team. They lost 2 games and they were still ranked, so that's pretty obvious that they're still a pretty dang good team, right? So, the Denver game is game they lost last year, close game, and it was 8-7 last year, and I would suspect you're going to see a very similar score. Both these teams are very defensive-minded. Denver scored a lot of goals this season, but the competition hasn't been great. One thing to note, you mentioned the Michigan game. Denver scored 4 goals in that game. Game. Only 4 goals. Michigan has a strong defense, so if Maryland can play to that level, I could suspect you could see a similar score to the Michigan game, but we'll have to see what happens there.
Definitely, and I think it'll be interesting to see how the defense kind of responds, because when you have that ending, that's not great.
2 final sports to wrap up the coverage here. Wrestling against Drexel. It was senior day. A lot of people got in. Could have predicted that win there. They're going to have 1 week off before the Big Ten championships. I'll give a very full preview in next week's episode, but the brackets aren't out yet for that meet, so it's kind of hard to say what's going to happen. I could make some predictions, but I'll let the Big Ten put the brackets out, and then I'll let you guys know. Women's track team, indoor Big Ten championships. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure last week I said there's a chance they'd score 0 points. I'm pretty sure I said that, right?
You did in fact say that.
My prediction was absolutely correct. Did not score a point. Pretty underwhelming performance, I would say. But it was kind of expected if you looked at where they fell on the rankings. So their best individual performance was 11th in the relay, and the 4x4 came in 9th. So pretty close to getting some points, but really that meet was never going to be anything that they would, finish in the top 8 or 9. And it was basically going into the meet, they were like, could they score points? And Maryland did not. And indoor track season for the women is over. They currently have nobody slated for the NCAA championships. So it's on to outdoor track. The men will start competing now for Maryland too. So that's pretty much all I got on track, and we'll see what happens. Well, that's all for the regular sports coverage of the week, but there's 2 more things we wanted to touch on. The first, which has made big news, at least in the college football world, is NCAA 25 has announced that 134 different teams, I believe, maybe 133 different teams will be in it, as well as sent out kind of, contracts for the athletes, which I don't know the exact number for how many have signed at Maryland, but it's a pretty big deal that NCAA football is back.
Yeah, pretty much all. I'm so excited. I'm about to be grinding at least 100+ hours next year with Mike in our house. So looking forward to that. Real quick, top 3, before we move on, top 3 overall players and what are the ratings that they get this year for the Terps? And out of the past, in the Loxley era, who do we think would have been the highest rated player? Real quick.
Loxley era.
I can go
Probably
first for this year's team. I will say Dante Trader is a 86. I'm gonna give. I feel like they don't ever rate defensive line or offensive lineman high, so I'm gonna go Caden Prather at 83, and then give me. Trying to think who would be the third guy. Give me Roman Hemby at 82.
about to say Roman Hemby. I think he's going to be rated pretty high. To talk about just overall players in the Loxley era, Rakeem Jarrett would have been really fun to play with that speed he had. Dante Demas, before the injury, would have been really fun to play with. Obviously, Talia. Yeah, a lot of guys on the offense I'm thinking about. Overall, though, Maryland football history, Stephon Diggs, of course. Our guy, Steve Studer, would have been amazing to play with on the punt and kick returns. Yeah, Brendan, any players from you?
I'll give an addition. Ruben Hippolyte, I think I'll give 81.
Okay, shout out Ruben. Close
Maybe
friend.
a future guest of the podcast. I don't know though. Maybe not. Who knows?
You're hinting at something in the works.
Yeah, but that was
That's all I'll say. That's all I'll say.
NCAA 25 will be super fun to play. When they come out with the basketball, I will be playing at the Rec for Penn State. Super cool. Brendan, doing an old building, which I kind of like. Is there anything that you think Maryland could do to kind of have something similar?
Well said, Sam. I'll give a little bit of context for those who have no idea what Sam is talking about. Penn State played a game at Rec Hall, which is their old basketball stadium, old basketball stadium. I'm talking 6,000, 7,000 people. Super packed environment. They used to have people standing on the floor. Didn't have that, but they played a game there this past week. They beat Illinois in a pretty comedic fashion, I think, for Maryland fans, where Illinois just collapsed in the last 2 minutes of that game. So if you're a Maryland fan, you haven't checked out the highlights of that game, and you're kind of annoyed by the taunting that Illinois did, I'd go check it out. But I just think overall, Penn State's a team that's not going to fill their regular stadium on most games. And so
it also sucks, that stadium.
Yeah, it's no good. So getting a game in a different place, obviously still on campus. Obviously they played there before, and it's going to be a more hostile environment. And Brad Underwood said after the game that he didn't like playing there, which if you're on the Penn State team or Penn State fan, that's obviously something you want. It's a home court advantage, and I thought it was super cool. I mean, Maryland couldn't really do anything to replicate that, I don't think, because everybody would think Cole, but Cole is now the Jones Hill House, and so it wouldn't really work. There's a football field there. It's it wouldn't really be possible. And so I guess the other two places would be the Pavilion, but that would be high school, so that would be ridiculous. That would be what, 2,000 people? That's not possible, right? And then they played in Ritchie from 1920 to 1930. Don't quote me on those years, but also probably could fit 800 people. So I don't think Maryland could replicate it, but it's super cool.
I think a Georgetown Maryland game, at an old arena, try to find something like that. That would hit. That would go pretty crazy. But yeah, I agree. I don't think there's much to that. I don't know if Kevin Willard would want to do that either. So we'll see. And speaking of Kevin Willard, I don't know if anybody's going to pick him. But this is our draft for the week. We got top 3 best all-time coaches. Lefty Driesell passing lately definitely will be up there in terms of consideration. I'm going to give it to Brendan. You can start us off. I'll go next, and then Mike, you can wrap us up.
I appreciate the first pick, Sam. This might be the easiest pick of all time. I'm going to go James Kehoe, longtime track coach. When you talk about success, you talk about championships. There's nothing greater than a championship. 48 total conference championships. 48? I mean, come on. Best first pick of all time.
Yeah, I mean, he does have a place named after him. That's that's kind of a flex. I don't know. Not a lot of other Maryland coaches have that, so I'll give it to him. I'm going to go next. I'm going to take the guy that Mike would definitely take if he was there. So I'm going to go Gary Williams, national championship winner. Brought this school, its most recent big sport championship other than the other person that I'm thinking of. So I'm going to go Gary Williams.
For my pick, I'm going to take not only one of the best coaches in Maryland history, but probably the sports history as a whole. I'm going to take Missy Maharg. 27 conference titles, 9 National Coach of the Year awards, 7 national titles. She had 5 in 7 years, 20 appearances in the Final Four. Sustained success. Nobody does it like her. And to follow that train of sustained success, I'm going to take Brenda Fries. I know Sam wanted to take her there, by judging by his reaction.
Oh,
Even if you added all their championships up, you don't have 48. So that's all I get.
Gosh darn it, Mike. Good pick though. I'm gonna go with an old school pick. Not really old school, I guess technically, but he is old. I'm gonna go Sasha Sarofsky. Has been a staple in the soccer program, and I like him, so I'm gonna go Sasha.
I don't know about you guys. I don't think you guys paid enough attention during Terrific Terps. I mean, you guys missed some pretty obvious coaches here. My next pick, I will go with Dr. Sue Tyler, coached lacrosse and field hockey at University of Maryland, and she won national championships in both. I mean, winning a national championship in one sport is hard, but she did it in both. Absolutely incredible feat there. And I'll stay with women's lacrosse, and I'll pick Cindy Timcha, won 8 NCAA championships at Maryland. And she won 7 in a row. Winning 7 national championships in a row is pretty darn incredible. So I'll stick right there. Most winningest coach in NCAA women's lacrosse history. She's still coaching, actually, at Navy. Only coach ever to lead 3 different schools to the NCAA tournament. So, yeah, those are my 3 picks. I think I absolutely swept this draft, but I don't know your thoughts on that.
It's not going to look good on a graphic.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm pandering to the audience here. They're going to have no idea what you're talking about. For my last pick, I'm kind of in between 2. There's a couple names. Obviously, Ralph Friedgen is up there. I think when you think about him, I think you have to think about Brett Nelligan. So he might be up there. But I'm gonna go. I don't know. This is tough, man. This is tough. Brett is who is the dad of the current coach? I want to make sure I get the names right.
You're talking about the dad of the current gymnastics coach.
Yeah. Who's that?
I have to look that up. I mean, it's
coach.
Yeah. I think I don't know if he's it's Bob Nelligan. I got it. That's it.
Let me go Bob Nelligan.
Well, that's a terrific tarp. I'll give you that.
And that from B. So Bob Nelligan.
Thank you, Sam.
You mentioned it there, Sam, but I'm going to take Ralph Friedgen, the Fridge.
Yeah.
Completely transformed the football program.
Yeah.
The program did not reach a bowl game in the 10 seasons where before he came. Then he takes them to 7 bowl games in the 10 seasons that he is here. Just an absolute great job by him, and Maryland made a terrible mistake by firing him, one that it took basically a decade to recover from.
Pandering to our former guest, but I love it. I think Mike probably swept this one. I don't know, man.
I mean, maybe you could do the graphic and you put little trophies next to that, and you could put 48 ACC champions. Whatever.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Cool. But good picks. I actually don't love my draft, so I'll give it to you guys. But some good picks there, some good coaches. But we have one more coach to talk about, and that's in Terrific Terp segment. Mr. Brennan, take it away.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he's in the discussion of being a top 9 all-time coach at Maryland, but he's a Terrific Terp, so I'll give him his kudos. It's easy to forget how dominant Maryland used to be at sports that no longer exist at the school. This week's Terrific Terp led the men's swimming team to 19 consecutive winning seasons and 7 ACC championships. William Bill Campbell founded the team and was the team's first coach in 1956. He was the head of the program for 20 years until 1976. During that time, he had an overall record of 206-52. He was 88-29 in the ACC. After Campbell left, the team never finished better than 4th in the ACC ever again. On top of being a coach, Campbell was a kinesiology professor at the University of Maryland. In 1982, he helped found the Maryland Athletics Hall of Fame, which he was inducted into 7 years later. During his time, he coached the Singapore Olympic team in 1960, and then he also served as a referee in the ACC for swimming and diving championships. Before he arrived at UMD, he was a college diving champion at Springfield College. And when he left, he was a champion too. He won the national championship at the senior games as a master's swimmer. While the swimming team no longer exists at Maryland, Campbell was one of the greats and is this week's terrific term.
That was another coach added to the mix, so we'll have to think about him next time. But that wraps up this week's episode. You can find us all on socials at Under the Shell. We have a really, really fun guest, probably one of my favorite guests, coming up next week. So if you stuck around this long, please, please, please give Uno a listen. That'll be super fun episode. So find us again at Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your pod. And to all of you out there, Maryland men's and women's basketball barreling toward interesting finishes, but I hope you can crown your queen or king tonight. Have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
Guess what? You got Under the Shell podcast. Nobody does it better.